Hey guys, in this video we're looking at power and conflict poetry, focusing on the poem My Last Duchess, which was written by Robert Browning. So, the poem in a nutshell is as follows. It was written in 1842 by Robert Browning, who was a Victorian poet famous for his dramatic monologues, which are poems where a character unintentionally reveals their darkest flaws. It's based on the Duke of Ferrara, showing a portrait of his late wife to an envoy. Whilst trying to show off his arts and status, he accidentally reveals that he's a jealous, narcissistic control freak who likely had his wife murdered because she was too kind to others. The main message of the poem is the corrupting nature of absolute power and the objectification of women. It critiques how men in the Victorian Renaissance eras viewed their wives as possessions to be tamed or curated like art. The spot of joy in the 900 years old name symbolises the conflict between the Duchess's natural humanity and the Duke's rigid, arrogant obsession with status and bloodline. Key ideas in the poem are as follows. So it looks at the corruption of power. So the Duke uses his high social status and 900 years old name to exert total control of others. He treats his wife as a possession rather than a human being, eventually using his power to stop her life when he can't control her spirit. Looks at objectification and control. So to the Duke, art is better than reality. He prefers the painted Duchess because he can hide her behind a curtain and control who she looks at. He turns a living woman into a piece of furniture to satisfy her narcissism. It looks at pride and jealousy. So the Duke's primary conflict is his wounded pride. He's offended that his wife was too soon made glad by small things like a sunset or a branch of cherries, instead of being exclusively impressed by his status. He views her kindness as a lack of respect for his rank. The false facade, appearance versus reality, is another key idea. So the poem is a dramatic monologue where the Duke tries to sound sophisticated and polite to the envoy. However, his polished speech cannot hide his inner cruelty. Like the statue of Neptune taming the seahorse, his outer beauty masks a desire for brutal domination. Let's look at the structure of the poem. So, it's written in a dramatic monologue, and this means that the poem is written in a single, continuous voice. The structural choice reflects the Duke's total monopoly on power. He is the only one who speaks, effectively silencing his wife in the portrait and the envoy who is the listener. It uses rhyming couplets and iambic pentameter. So the poem uses a tight AABB rhyme scheme and a consistent heartbeat-like rhythm. This represents the Duke's obsession with control and his desire to appear sophisticated and composed to the visitor. It uses enjambment and hidden rhymes. So although the poem rhymes, sentences often run over the ends of the lines. This creates a conversational, natural flow that masks the rigid rhyme scheme, and this mirrors the Duke's character, a smooth, polite exterior that hides a rigid, controlling and murderous interior. The single stanza structure. So unlike the organized stanzas of War Photographer, this poem is one long block of text. This creates an overwhelming claustrophobic feeling, rejecting the Duke's relentless personality and how he dominates the space around him without allowing anyone else a breather. So let's look at the context of the poem. So it looks at the Italian Renaissance. So the poem is set in 16th century Italy, which is a period known for its flourishing art, but also its dark Machiavellian politics. Browning uses the setting to explore how civilized high culture can often mask brutal, cold-blooded corruption. It looks at the real Duke of Ferrara. So Browning based the speaker on Alfonso II d'Este, who's the fifth Duke of Ferrara. His first wife, Lucrezia, died at age 17 under suspicious circumstances, rumoured poisoning, and this poem depicts the Duke negotiating for his next wife, just as the real Alfonso did. It looks at Victorian patriarchy. So although it's set in the past, the poem was written in 1842. It serves as a critique of Victorian social attitudes, where women were legally the property of their husbands, the doctrine of coverture, and were expected to be silent, decorative, and obedient. It also looks at the Brownian dramatic monologue. So Robert Browning was the master of this form. He lived during the rise of modern psychology and was fascinated by unreliable narrators, characters who revealed their own insanity, cruelty, or narcissism to the reader while trying to justify themselves. Let's look at the actual poem, My Last Duchess. So here is the poem. You're more than welcome to pause the video and press play when you're ready to continue. Let's look at doing a line-by-line analysis then. So, that's my last Duchess painted on the wall. The method here is a possessive pronoun in the word my, and the analysis is that he immediately establishes his ownership, as last suggests he's replaceable. Looking as if she were alive, I call. Enjambment is shown here, as the as if is a sinister hint that she's actually dead. The enjambment keeps his speech flowing, showing his control over the conversation. That piece a wonder. Now, Fra Pandolf's hands is an illusion of Fra Pandolf, and here he is name-dropping a famous artist to show off his wealth. He values the painting as a piece, object, more than the actual woman inside the painting. Worked busily a day, and there she stands is personification, and there she stands makes the art sound like a living prisoner. Wilt you please sit and look at her? I said, is a rhetorical question and an imperative as well. So it sounds like a polite invitation, but as a duke is actually an order, and here he's controlling the envoy's movements. Fra Pandolf, by design, for never read, is direct address, as he's explaining his design, which is his cleverness, and he wants the envoy to know he's an expert in art and people. Strangers like you, that pictured countenance, is diction in the word countenance, and here he uses high-level, sophisticated language to assert his intellectual superiority. The depth and passion of his earnest glance is imagery here, as he is jealous even of the painting's look. He's obsessed with who she was looking at. But to myself they turned, since none puts by, is parenthesis here in the brackets, and this reveals his secret power. The brackets act like the curtain he is describing, which is a private aside. The curtain I have drawn for you, but I, is symbolism, which shows the curtain represents his total control. In death, he finally decides who gets to look at her. And seemed as though they'd ask me if they durst, is diction here in the word durst, again meaning dared, and here it shows he's a terrifying man, as people are afraid to even ask him questions. How such a glance came there. So, not the first, is a narrative voice here, as he is defensive. He is already anticipating that people think she was looking at someone else with love. Are you to turn and ask thus? Sir, 'twas not. His direct address with the word sir here, and it shows he keeps the envoy's attention fixed on his narrative. Her husband's presence only, called that spot, is a metaphor here in the word spot of joy, and it shows he views her blush as a spot, a stain or a flaw in her character, because it wasn't only for him. Of joy into the Duchess's cheek, perhaps, is enchantment, as the perhaps shows he is speculating and obsessing over her past interactions. Fra Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle lapse is quoted speech, as he's imagining conversations that might not have even happened to justify his jealousy. Must never hope to reproduce the feint is hyperbole, and here he mocks the artist's flattery, showing his cynical view of human connection. Half flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff is foreshadowing and diction in the word dies again, and using the word dies near throat is a very dark hint at how she actually died. For example, it's likely strangulation or poison here. Was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough, is a judgmental tone, and shows he dismisses her kindness as weakness. For calling up that spot of joy she had, is repetition again of the quote spot of joy, and here his obsession with her blush is repeating, showing his growing agitation. A heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, is apospiasis, which is a breaking off speech, and it shows he stammers to pretend he is struggling to find words, but it's a performance of false humility. Too easily impressed, she liked whatever, is parallelism in the words too soon compared with too easily, and shows he is listing her crimes. To him, being happy is a character flaw. She looked on, and her looks went everywhere, is a method innuendo, and shows he is hinting that she was unfaithful, though the evidence he gives is very innocent, as she was unfaithful to sunsets and cherries. Sir, 'twas all one. My favour at her breast is a juxtaposition here, and shows he is angry that his expensive jewellery, favour, was treated the same as a sunset. The dropping of the daylight in the west is a natural imagery here, and this highlights the Duchess's love for nature, which contrasts with the Duke's love for cold, hard objects. The bow of cherries, some officious fool, is plosive alliteration in the letters B and P here, and shows the B and P sounds in these lines demonstrate his spitting anger. Broke in the orchard for her. The white mule is symbolism here, and shows the white mule represents her humility and simplicity, which the Duke finds insulting to his status. She rode with round the terrace, all and each is pronoun all here method, and shows he is frustrated that he isn't special to her. He is just one of many things she likes. Would draw from her alike the approving speech. There's irony here, and it shows he is annoyed by her politeness. He wanted her to be arrogant like him. Or blush, at least. She thanked men. Good, but thanked is exclamation and caesura here, shown by the exclamation mark, and the good here is sarcastic, as he is reaching the peak of his rant. Somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked, is unhyphenated breaks here, and these breaks show his loss of control as his anger takes over his speech. My gift of a 900-years-old name is hyperbole as well as numerical imagery. This is the core of his identity, and he values his history more than his wife's life. with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame is a rhetorical question, and here he uses stoop to show that even talking to her about his feelings is beneath him. This sort of trifling, even had you skill, is diction in the word trifling, and here he dismisses her entire personality as trifling, meaning it's unimportant. In speech, which I have not, to make your will, is irony, and here he claims he is not good at speaking, yet he is manipulating the envoy perfectly. Quite clear to such an one, and say, justice is an imperative, as he wanted her to change, but was too proud to ask. Or that in you disgusts me, here you miss, is strong diction in the word disgusts, and it shows his true feelings of hatred towards her individuality. Or there exceed the mark, and if she let, is a metaphor in the word archery and target, and shows he views her behaviour as a failure to hit a target of perfection. Herself be lessened, so, nor plainly set, is diction in the word lessened, and it shows he views women as students to be taught by men, again emphasising the control. Her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, is archaic language in the word forsooth here, and it makes him sound like an old-fashioned, rigid aristocrat. Even then would be some stooping, and I choose is repetition of stoop here again, and it reinforces that his pride is more important than his marriage. Never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, has a monosyllabic, never to stoop, and this is a firm final statement of his character. Whenever I passed her, but who passed without, is a rhetorical question, and shows he is jealous of a smile. He wanted a monopoly on her happiness. Much the same smile. This grew. I gave commands is a euphemism as well as caesura here, and I gave commands is the most famous line, as it's a cold way of saying he ordered her death. Then all smiles stop together. There she stands. Her sibilants here in the S sounds and short sentences, and the S sounds here create a hushed, deadly tone. The smiles stopping together implies her sudden death. As if alive. Wilt please you rise, we'll meet, is a shift in tone here, and here he moves from her murder back to polite host immediately, showing his lack of empathy. The company below, then, I repeat, shows a transition, and shows he's finished with the last Duchess and ready for the next one. Then counts your master's known munificence is diction in the word munificence, showing generosity, and shows here he's flattering the envoy's boss to ensure he gets a lot of money for the next marriage. It's ample warrant that no just pretense is a legalistic language here, and shows he is treating the marriage like a business contract. Of mine for dowry will be disallowed is diction in the word dowry, and shows he is motivated by money and power, not love. Though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed, is an adjective in the word fair, and shows he only cares about the next girl's beauty, to be painted, and her father's money. At starting is my object. Nay, we'll go is a metaphor in the word object, and demonstrates he literally calls his future wife an object. Together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, is symbolism, as Neptune is the god of the sea, and he's comparing himself to a god here. Taming a seahorse, though a rarity, is a metaphor, and the seahorse is his wife. He tames women through fear and violence. Which clause of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me is the final pronoun here, me, in this word, and the poem ends on me, perfectly summarising the Duke's total narcissism. Let's look at section by section analysis then. So, lines 1 to 13 show the power of the portrait. What happens is the Duke reveals a painting of his late wife hidden behind a curtain. He brags about the artist, Frau Pandolf, and notices that he is the only person allowed to move the curtain. The effect of this is that this establishes the Duke's narcissism and obsession with control. By turning his wife into a piece of art, he's finally successfully objectified her. The fact that none puts by the curtain but I shows that he views his wife's beauty as a private commodity that he alone owns. The main techniques to highlight here are the possessive pronoun, symbolism, and the parenthesis, which acts like a whisper, showing his manipulative nature. Lines 13 to 34 show the spots of joy and jealousy, and what happens is the Duke complains that the Duchess was too cheerful. He was angry that she blushed and smiled at everyone, the sunset, a bow of cherries, or a white mule, rather than just at him. This reveals the Duke's extreme insecurity and arrogance. He is insulted that she didn't treat his 9-year-old name as being more important than a simple act of kindness from a stranger, and he views her natural humanity as a lack of respect for his rank. The main techniques to highlight here are the metaphor, juxtaposition, and plosive alliteration demonstrate showing his spitting anger. Lines 47 to 56 showed the new dowry and Neptune, and what happens here is the Duke abruptly changes the subject back to the business of his next marriage. As they walk downstairs, he points out a bronze statue of Neptune taming a seahorse. And here, the shift from murder to a dowry, which is money, shows a sociopathic lack of remorse. The statue of Neptune is a final metaphor for the Duke himself. He sees himself as a godlike figure who exists to tame and dominate those weaker than him. The main techniques to highlight here: addiction, metaphor, and the final pronoun, as the poem ends on me, centering his ego. Let's look at the overall interpretation of this poem. So, Robert Browning's My Last Duchess explores a chilling intersection of absolute power, narcissistic jealousy, and the objectification of women. Through the poem of a controlled, chillingly polite dramatic monologue, the poem reveals the Duke as a cold-hearted predator who values status and art over human life. The Duke's obsession with controlling his wife's glance, even after her death, depicts a man who views people merely as collectibles to be created and silenced. The poem suggests that power without empathy leads to total corruption, transforming a marriage into a transaction and a woman into a piece of property. By the end, the Duke's casual transition from discussing his late wife's murder to the dowry for his next bride reveals a horrifying cycle of domestic tyranny. His final boast about the statue of Neptune taming a seahorse serves as a final dark metaphor for his worldview, that the powerful exist to break and dominate the beautiful, leaving the reader with a sense of lingering horror at the Duke's unchecked authority. Let's look at a comparison checklist that we must use in the essays when we're using this poem. So we must look at the controlling oppressor. So unlike the haunted witness in War Photographer, the Duke is a cold-hearted architect of the suffering. He is a participant in cruelty who feels no guilt. Look at art versus reality. So the Duke prefers the painted Duchess to the living one because he can control the ordered image on the wall, whereas he could not control her natural chaos or joy in life. We look at the critique of patriarchy. So the biting contrast between the Duke's 900 years old name and the Duchess's smile highlights how institutional power is used to crush individual humanity. We also look at the false performance. So the Duke acts like a sophisticated connoisseur of art to hide the fact that he's a murderer, suggesting that high culture can often mask low morality. Let's look at what poems you can compare with My Last Duchess then. So we can compare it with Ozymandias in terms of power and pride. Similarities are the arrogance of power. So both the Duke and Ozymandias are obsessed with their own status. Ozymandias calls himself King of Kings, while the Duke brags of his 900 years old name. We look at art as a legacy. So both leaders use art, for example, a statue and a painting, to project their power and ensure they are remembered as dominant figures. They also look at totalitarian control. So both poems feature leaders who demand absolute submission. Ozymandias commands the mighty to despair, while the Duke gives commands to silence his wife. Differences are the persistence of power. So in Ozymandias, power is defeated by time, for example in the quotes boundless and bare, the lone and level sands. But in My Last Duchess, the Duke's power is still very much alive and threatening as he moves on to his next victim. Another difference is the perspective. So Ozymandias is told through a traveller who sees a ruin, creating distance and showing the fall of a tyrant. My Last Duchess is a direct monologue, making the Duke's threat feel immediate and claustrophobic. We can also compare My Last Duchess with Checking Out My History in terms of identity and control. So similarities are the curating of truth, where both poems deal with how powerful people control what others see. The Duke draws the curtain on the Duchess's image, while the British education system blinded Agard to his own identity. Another similarity is the power of voice. So both poems use a strong, distinct voice to explore power. One uses the sophisticated, cold voice of the oppressor, the Duke, while the other uses the rhythmic, rebellious voice of the oppressed, Agard. Differences are the intent of the speaker. So the Duke wants to hide the Duchess's true personality to maintain his reputation. Agard wants to uncover Toussaint Louverture and his own history to find his true self. Another difference is the final message. So My Last Duchess ends with a symbol of taming and domination, Neptune, and Checking Out My History ends with a symbol of liberation and self-creation, I carving out my identity. Let's look at key quotes to use for My Last Duchess. So when we are using this poem in our essays, we have to make sure we're looking at these quotes to revise. That's My Last Duchess painting on the wall, looking as if she were alive. And this shows a possessive pronoun and foreshadowing, immediately establishing the Duke's view of his wife as a trophy or possession. The as if here hints at the sinister truth that she is now dead. The curtain I have drawn for you, but I, shows symbolism and parenthesis. And here the curtain represents the Duke's absolute control over who sees the Duchess. In death, he has finally achieved a total monopoly on her glance that he couldn't get in life. I know not how, as if she ranked. My gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift shows hyperbole and arrogant tone, revealing his extreme pride. And here he is offended that she valued natural beauty or kindness as much as his aristocratic status. I gave commands. Then all smiles stopped together, shows euphemism and caesura, and is a chillingly cold way to describe murder. The semicolon creates a heavy pause, representing the finality of the Duchess's life and his absolute power to end it. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, is a metaphor and symbolism. As he moves to his next marriage, he points out a statue that mirrors himself. He is a godlike figure, Neptune, and his wives are the seahorses to be broken and dominated.